Hello! With our summer break over, we are glad to welcome you back to another episode of The Dig. Have you ever heard of CORE? I'm not speaking about drill core. You may ask, then what is CORE, Ryan? And what do they do? Those are very good questions. And if you believe in protecting the Canada brand as a key competitive advantage for your company, then stay tuned. To help us better understand about CORE, the Canadian Obudsperson for Responsible Enterprise, I'm very pleased to have Sheri Meyerhoffer, who on April 8, 2019, was appointed as the very first Ombudsperson for CORE. Sheri will explain how her team is watching out for our Canada brand. But before we go over to Sheri, let's check in with Brian to learn about the top news stories in our sector with our 6 and 60 coming up right now.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And here we go. The EU will advance legislation to strengthen the bloc's supply chain for critical minerals by bringing processing plants to the continent. Boeing has suspended purchases of aluminum from Russia. The company has not placed any new orders since March, when it stopped buying Russian titanium. Since the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law, major EV and battery mineral suppliers like Toyota and LG have announced billions of dollars worth of new investments. Mining companies hope Chileans' rejection of a proposed constitution will force the government to adopt a more market-friendly approach over new policies and taxes. The government of Espírito Santo in Brazil want to freeze assets belonging to Vale, BHP, and Samarco to make sure they have reserves to pay reparations for a 2015 dam burst. A court in Burkina Faso has found executives of Trevali Mining guilty of involuntary manslaughter relating to 8 fatalities during an April flash flood at its Percoa zinc mine. And that is your 6 and 60. Now, here's Ryan in his exclusive interview with Sheri Meyerhoffer.
Hi, Sheri. Welcome to The Dig.
Thank you very much, Ryan. It's great to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about CORE and its mandate?
Sure. So the CORE is a business and human rights ombud institution. We are part of the Government of Canada, but we are arm's length. We are a non-judicial dispute resolution mechanism, and we receive complaints, or we deal with complaints or matters related to alleged human rights abuses, related to the operations of Canadian garment, mining, and oil and gas sectors.
Okay, so those are the main sectors that you're focused on.
We just have 3 sectors, and it's only human rights.
Okay, that's good to know. So what was the driving force behind the creation of CORE?
Yeah, so we had to go back a couple of decades to get to the driving force. So around the turn of the century, around the year 2000 or just before, the Canadian government was receiving a number of inquiries and concerns from other foreign governments, from both foreign and Canadian NGOs, that there were extractive companies, mining and oil and gas companies, that's where it was focused to start with, who were causing alleged harms to local individuals, environments, municipalities, organizations, and they were concerned, bringing those concerns to the Government of Canada. Of course, Canada has a long-standing history of being a promoter and protector of human rights. We were one of the first signatories in 1947, to the Universal Declaration of Business and Human Rights and all the documents that came after that. We pride ourselves on being promoters and protectors of human rights as individuals and governments and companies, I believe. This is the Canadian brand. And the fact that there were things going on out there that were at least appeared to be, against the Canadian brand, required the government to bring people together. It brought the extractive industries together. It brought those CSOs together and said, what is happening out there? And how would we address this? And there was a series of national roundtables at that time over a number of years. And then there was a report. And the report had a number of recommendations. And one of those recommendations was the creation of an ombud office. Now, what happened after those recommendations came out in 2007 was in 2009, they created the office of the CSR counselor. Now, that wasn't an ombud institution. It was a counselor who was, focused on monitoring the activities of, mining and oil and gas companies abroad. but it wasn't an ombuds institution, and it remained a concern to civil society organizations that it wasn't a standalone, arm's length independent office that could receive complaints. So there were two CSR counselors appointed who did great work, in providing, I think, some insights into what was going on and some advice to companies and some advice to the government. But the civil society organizations were still concerned that it wasn't independent. And so around 2015, the government started to look again at the issue and sit down and consider what they might be able to do. And in 2018, they decided to they announced the creation of the Canadian Obudsperson for Responsible Enterprise, the office. And then they appointed me as the first ombud of that office in May of 2019. Now, along the way, in 2013, we had the Rana Plaza disaster, right? I don't know if everyone, but related to the garment sector. And so instead of it just being extractive, which was the historical from a couple of decades ago, they felt that, this third sector should be added to the mandate of my office. So that's the history of where we came from. And again, it's about being accountable to the Canadian brand. That's what it's about.
Right. Is there any discussions about making it more broader as opposed to specific sectors? You had mentioned, and through the history, we can understand why it's of these three. Is there a dialogue to say, listen, to your point, the Canada brand, and it's something our association is very keen on and protecting, because we see it as a value, competitive opportunity for companies from Canada to leverage. So is there a desire or dialogue to look at it to be more broader?
It was a question that was flagged when I was first appointed, that at some point the government may come back to me to ask about the addition of sectors. It is something that I've always had my ears open for, but to date, they haven't come back with a request. So it is possible in the future. It would have to be a request from the government of Canada. But in the meantime, we're focused on these three sectors. But I wanted to talk a little bit about our mandate itself. And there's 4 components to our mandate. We are to promote, advise, review, and recommend. So what do we promote? We promote the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which I trust your members are familiar with, or if not, would encourage them to look into, and the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. So those are the 2 things that we promote. We advise Canadian companies with respect to responsible business conduct, and that's all about acting in a accountable, responsible, and sustainable manner when they're operating abroad. And we also then we review, that's our dispute resolution mechanism, receiving complaints. We would review matters that are brought to our attention. Those matters could be brought to our attention by your members or the mining company, or by the people who feel that their rights have been abused. So we're there to review situations and to make recommendations. And that's our 4th component with respect to how we could resolve a dispute. Like, in what way would we resolve it? Will we do mediation, joint fact finding, independent fact finding? How are we going to resolve it? And then when we come to an assessment of what is the harm and how could it be addressed, we could make recommendations on what is the remedy. And the remedy can be anything from an apology to remediation of land or some kind of compensation to individuals or communities that are impacted. So that's our mandate in a nutshell.
Great. And you kind of explained a little bit about the kind of what triggers you into action, so to speak, because it's interesting here that a company, when I first learned about your organization or your department was that, it's going to be the perceived victim that would be asking, for your help, but Canadian companies themselves can also ask for your engagement. So thinking mining in context, are there some examples or an example you'd like to share with us to kind of make this concept real?
Yeah, so I have a couple examples that I'd like to share just to help your members understand what it is that we do and how we can help them and help the people that in the communities where they work. So the first one would be, and we all know that when there's a mining operation, there is always the potential where there'll be some kind of, there's toxins that are used, chemicals that are used, and there can be an escape of those chemicals into a water source. So if that were to happen, and then we're talking about contaminated water, and it impacts the people in that community, individuals and whole groups, the whole community, their right to clean water, which is an internationally recognized human right. It also just generally it infringes on their right to a clean environment, which has itself, the environment now been recognized as a right in itself. I have a right to a clean environment. And so so there's an internationally recognized right that has been abused because of the operations of a mining company. So, I mean, an individual or the community could reach out to the Corps and make a complaint, or the company could say, this has occurred. We don't want to go to court. We do want to address this. They don't seem to trust us dealing with this one-on-one. You have the face of Canada and you have these services that you provide. Could you help us informally mediate this? Okay. And so we could do it either on a complaint, which we could also then move to mediation too, even on a complaint, but the company could reach out for informal mediation to address it. So that's one example. Another example is, and my understanding is your members, like who provide, services and equipment, and they're on the ground abroad. They're working, with and for the mining companies, and they're employing people. So, workers' rights are human rights, right? And so let's say we're in a mining operation in a country outside of Canada, and, we have an occupational health and safety issue. Now, one of your member companies, let's say the complaint comes to them, or they're directly involved with it. They're not large enough maybe to have their own grievance mechanism, or they haven't put it in place. But they want to address the issue. They can see that something has arisen. They can see that it's not right, and they want to remedy it. Well, they could reach out to us, or so could they could say to the worker, you could reach out to the Corps, because maybe the worker feels more confident if they're reaching out. Or they could reach out themselves to us. And again, we could help them resolve that issue to the satisfaction of the worker or workers, depending on how broad the issue is. So those are two examples. One where it's in the environment, which impacts on a human right, and the other on the worker themselves.
Right. And it's interesting that with regards to the first example, I never thought of, an environmental issue actually being a human rights infringement. But it makes sense now when you explain it the way you did. So of course it is. It is a human right to have a clean environment. And of course, you mentioned in your second example there that I think that would ring very true for a lot of our companies. And I like how you described it, because a lot of them are small, medium-sized enterprises trying to, grow their business, and a lot of them, because of the mining industry, become international exporters very quickly. And so to know that there's a support mechanism here with your office, it's good to know. So I really appreciate you providing those two examples. So is there, I really appreciate you here kind of explain the mandate, what you do, those 4 key pieces to your mandate and these examples and stuff. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I just know in my heart, and in your members, that good companies know that it just makes good business sense to be responsible. That I think is just goes without saying, and it makes good sense because you want to attract investors, and you want to make sure that your workers are well taken care of, because of course you get better service if your workers are well taken care of, and it all at the end of the day is about the Canadian brand, which we as individuals and companies benefit from, getting jobs in foreign countries. So we also have to be a part of maintaining that brand. So good companies know that this is the right thing to do. And that I think they will find, our mechanism and our office a good resource to help them, put their best foot forward, should they find themselves in a situation that requires resolution.
Well, I fully agree with you. I've always believed, and my members can attest that I believe that the Canada brand is a competitive advantage, and that, you know, when we work abroad, that it's about the you know, where we should be seen as Canadian companies as ethical, trusted business partners, and it's really great to know that there's an office here to actually help them leverage that and execute on that. So without further you know, questions to offer and have a further conversation on this, I want to thank you for taking the time, Sheri, for being on the dig. It's been a real pleasure.
And thank you very much for this opportunity to raise awareness of my office with your members.
Thanks. That's it for this week's episode. I'd like to thank Sheri Meyerhoffer for taking the time to be on the dig. And remember, follow us on Twitter at Mining Suppliers and LinkedIn. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you get notified of all upcoming episodes. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, I'm Ryan McEachran. Take care and stay safe.